The will was read in the penthouse, surrounded by glass, chrome, and the suffocating smell of expensive lilies. My father, Daniel, sat at the head of the table like a king on a throne he'd rented. My brother Levi was already on his phone, scrolling through real estate listings for Hampton's estates. They didn't look like mourners. They looked like winners. When the lawyer cleared his throat, the room went silent. To Daniel went the auction empire, valued at $850 million. To Levi went the real estate portfolio and the liquid assets. And then he turned to me. To Scarlett he said, his voice flat, your grandfather leaves this. He slid a heavy, cream-colored envelope across the mahogany table. It hit the wood with a dull thud. I opened it. Inside wasn't a check. It wasn't a deed. It was a key. A single, corroded iron key, heavy and cold in my palm, flaking rust onto the pristine table. Daniel burst out laughing. A key to what? The janitor's closet? He leaned back, shaking his head. I guess the old man finally admitted what we all knew. Your restoration hobby is cute, Scarlett, but it does not pay the bills. Maybe you can sell the scrap metal. Levi snorted, not even looking up. I didn't speak. I ran my thumb over the head of the key. Beneath the rust I felt something. A raised emblem. 2 crossed keys. I'd only seen that symbol once, in a textbook during my master's program in Florence. It wasn't a joke. It was a directive. I stood up, put the key in my pocket and walked to the door. Levi called after me, asking if I needed a ride to the subway or if I could afford a fare with my inheritance. I kept walking. I did not slam the door. I just closed it on them, on their laughter, and on the life I was never going to live again. Before we find out what this key actually unlocks, drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to know who is part of our community today. I didn't go home. I went straight to JFK International Airport. I bought a one-way ticket to Rome on my credit card, watching the balance tick up into the red. I didn't care. Sitting in economy, wedged between a sleeping tourist and the window, I pulled the key out again. The metal was cold against my skin, grounding me. I thought about the last time I saw Grandpa Arthur. It wasn't in the penthouse. It was in his workshop, the one place Daniel refused to visit because it smelled of turpentine and old varnish. I was 12 when Arthur first taught me how to mix solvents. He didn't treat art like a commodity. He treated it like a living thing that could be hurt and healed. I remembered his hands, spotted with age and stained with pigment, guiding mine as we cleaned a 17th century landscape. He told me once that people look at a painting and see a price tag, but a restorer looks at a painting and sees the truth. You have to understand the chemistry of the paint, the weave of the canvas. You have to know what was added later to hide the cracks. Daniel never understood that. To him, art was just inventory. He'd walk into the gallery, point at a masterpiece and ask about the profit margin. He did not care about the history, he cared about the hype. And Levi was worse. Levi treated art like crypto, something to pump and dump. I closed my eyes and the memory shifted. It was 2 months ago. Grandpa Arthur was frail, his voice barely a whisper. He'd called me to the workshop late at night. He looked terrified. Not of dying, but of something else. He told me he tried to stop Daniel, but he couldn't. The board and the investors outvoted him. They wanted volume. They wanted speed. He grabbed my wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. He said, Daniel sees the world in quarterly earnings and thinks he owns these things. But we don't own art, Scarlett. We are just custodians. We are the guardians who keep it safe for the future. True value is in the history, not the price tag. Never forget that. Then he looked at me with eyes that were watery and desperate. He whispered that he had to leave me a burden because I was the only one with the hands to carry it. You are my sword, Scarlett. When the time comes, do not hesitate. I opened my eyes. The plane was descending into Rome. I looked at the key again. A burden. He hadn't left me nothing. He'd left me a weapon. And I was finally ready to use it. I wasn't just a restorer anymore. I was the one who was going to strip away the varnish and reveal the rot underneath. Daniel thought he had won. He thought he had inherited an empire. He had no idea he was sitting on a landmine and I was holding the detonator. Rome was sweltering, a chaotic mix of exhaust fumes and tourists fighting for selfie angles in front of St. Peter's Basilica. I didn't join the line. I walked past the souvenir stand selling plastic rosaries and headed toward a heavy, nondescript wooden door set into the high stone wall on the north side. It looked like a service entrance. To anyone else, it was invisible. 2 Swiss guards stood at attention, their halberds gleaming in the sun. They were imposing, statuesque, trained to intimidate. I didn't hesitate. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the iron key. It felt heavier now, charged with the miles I'd traveled. I held it up. The rust flaked in the sunlight, a stark contrast to their immaculate blue and gold uniforms. I expected a question. I expected to be turned away. Instead, the guard on the left looked at the key, then at my face. His eyes widened slightly. He didn't speak. He stepped back and slammed the butt of his halberd against the stone pavement, a sharp, echoing crack of acknowledgement. He opened the door. I stepped through and the noise of the city vanished instantly. The air inside was cool, smelling of beeswax and centuries-old stone. A priest in a simple black cassock was waiting for me. He didn't ask for my name. He simply nodded and turned, leading me down a long marble corridor that seemed to descend into the earth. We walked for 10 minutes. We passed doors marked with clearance levels that would make the Pentagon jealous. We weren't just going to the Vatican Library, we were going to the Archivum Secretum, the secret archives, the place where history is stored, not displayed. Finally, we entered a circular room lined with shelves that reached the domed ceiling. In the center stood a man in red vestments, reviewing a manuscript with white cotton gloves. He looked up. Cardinal Vittorio. He was older than my grandfather, with eyes that looked like they had seen empires rise and fall. He did not look kind, he looked formidable. He took off his gloves and told me I was late. Arthur said I would come, but he expected me sooner. I walked forward. I did not apologize. I said I came as soon as I had the key. I placed it on the desk between us. He picked it up, treating the rusted metal with more reverence than my father treated $1 million money. He turned it in the light, noting that this key had not been used in 40 years. He said my father never understood what it meant. Daniel thought Arthur was just a hoarder. He gestured to a wall of iron lockboxes behind him. Row 4, number 7. It is yours. I walked to the wall. My hand didn't shake. I inserted the key. The mechanism groaned, the sound of metal waking up from a long sleep, and then it clicked. I pulled the heavy drawer open. Inside there was no gold. There were no diamonds. There was a leather-bound ledger and a small, tattered sketchbook. I lifted the sketchbook first. The leather was cracked, the binding loose. I opened it to a random page. My breath hitched. It was a study of a hand sketched in red chalk. The hatching was distinctive, left-handed strokes, aggressive pressure. I knew this hand. I'd written my thesis on it. This is a Cellini, I whispered. These are the preliminary sketches for the Perseus. They've been missing since 1545. Cardinal Vittorio stepped closer, a spark of interest in his eyes. He noted that most people would look at that and see a doodle, while my father would look at it and see an auction lot. He asked how I knew it was genuine. I looked at him. The paper, I said. It's blue-tinted carta Izza. Cellini bought it in batches from a mill in Fabriano. And the ink? I pointed to a note in the margin. It's iron gall, but it's oxidized to a specific reddish brown. If this were a forgery, the forger would have used sepia to fake the H. This is the chemistry of the 16th century. The cardinal smiled, a slow, terrifying expression of approval. You speak the language, he said. Arthur was right. You are not a merchant. You are a custode. He tapped the ledger. Open that. I opened the ledger. It was a record of transactions dating back 50 years. I saw the name Restoration Trust, the subsidiary my father had shut down because he claimed it was bleeding money. I ran my finger down the columns. The trust wasn't losing money. It was spending it. Large sums wired to secure storage facilities, climate control systems, and private security firms across Europe. My grandfather hadn't been losing the family fortune. He had been spending it to hide these artifacts. He was protecting them. These items, the cardinal said, his voice dropping to a whisper, do not belong to the Carter family. They do not belong to the Vatican. They belong to history. During the war, your grandfather made a pact to keep them safe from looters, from the black market, and eventually from your father. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Daniel had spent my entire life calling Grandpa Arthur a senile old man who wasted money on dusty junk. He mocked me for fixing broken things. But we were the only ones who knew the truth. Daniel was building a glass tower in Manhattan to sell lies. My grandfather had built a bunker under Rome to protect the truth. And now I was the only one with the key. I sat in a quiet alcove of the Vatican Library, the ledger open in front of me, the smell of dust and history grounding me. My phone buzzed against the ancient wood table. It wasn't a text. It was a news alert from the Art World Wire. Carter Auction House announces historic legacy sale. Liquidating the private collection of the late Arthur Carter. Estimated value, $200 million. I stared at the screen. The private collection. Grandpa Arthur never sold those pieces. He never even displayed them. They were the ghosts he lived with. Then a voicemail notification popped up. Daniel. I put the phone to my ear. His voice was loud, distorted by wind, or maybe just his own ego. He assumed I was enjoying my Italian vacation. He wanted to let me know that since I ran off, he was clearing out the dead weight. He was listing the workshop property in Soho tomorrow. He called it prime real estate and said it smelled like turpentine and failure. He told me not to bother coming back as there was nothing left for me to clean. The line went dead. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt a cold, sharp clarity settle over me, like the focus on a microscope lens snapping into place. He wasn't just selling the collection. He was erasing us. He was selling the workshop where I learned to hold a brush, where Grandpa taught me the difference between value and worth. I opened my laptop and pulled up the auction catalog. It was flashy, full of high-resolution photos and marketing buzzwords like rare, untouched, and provenance. Lot 42. A Byzantine gold cross, 12th century. Lot 57. A bust of a Roman senator, marble, 1st century. Lot 89. The Madonna of the Lilies, oil-on panel, attributed to the Circle of Raphael. I looked down at the ledger. I ran my finger down the yellowed pages until I found the matching entries. Item 42. Custody of the Holy See. Non-transferable. Item 57. State property of Italy. Excavation site B. Protected. Item 89. Vatican secret archives. Restoration loan only. My heart hammered against my ribs. These weren't Grandpa's to sell. They were never ours. He was just the vault. If Daniel sold these, he wasn't just violating a will. He was selling stolen property. He was trafficking cultural heritage. But then I saw it. A small, handwritten note in the margin next to the Madonna. It was in my grandfather's handwriting, but the ink was different. Newer, black ballpoint, not the archival iron gall. Notes. Replica commission 1998. Artist, Rossi. Purpose, decoy. I froze. I scrolled to the next item in the catalog. A Renaissance chalice. I checked the ledger. Replica commission 2001. Purpose, security decoy. I checked another. And another. Every single high-ticket item Daniel was listing in his legacy auction had a corresponding entry in the ledger for a commissioned forgery. The realization hit me like a splash of ice water. Grandpa Arthur hadn't just hidden the real art. He had anticipated Daniel's greed decades ago. He had commissioned high-end copies to fill the vault, hiding the real treasures deep in storage or returning them to the church, leaving the fakes for his son to find. But here was the kill shot. I turned the page. Past the inventory there was a folder of invoices. Recent ones. Signed not by Arthur but by Daniel. Invoice 2019. To Studio Rossi. For aging treatment on the senator. Invoice 2021. To Chemical Supply Company. For historical pigment match. Daniel knew. He wasn't just an ignorant heir selling off things he didn't understand. He had been paying to maintain the forgeries. He knew the originals were gone or inaccessible, so he was polishing up the decoys, forging the provenance papers, and preparing to sell them to private billionaires as the real thing. He wasn't just a greedy son. He was running an international art fraud ring. He was going to sell fake history for $200 million, and he was using Grandpa's good name to authenticate the lie. I looked at the Cardinal. I told him Daniel was selling them in 48 hours. The Cardinal looked at the ledger, then at me. He said my father was selling smoke, but warned he would destroy my name in the process. I closed the heavy book. No, I said. He won't. I stood up. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. Daniel thought he was selling a legacy. He didn't realize he was selling the evidence of his own crime. And I was the only one who knew the chemistry of the paint. I was the only one who could prove they were fakes without even touching them. I looked at my phone one last time. The auction was in New York. I had a flight to catch. The Carter Gallery on Fifth Avenue was a cathedral of glass and ego. Inside, the air was thin, recycled through expensive filters and scented with the perfume of billionaires. I walked through the revolving doors and the noise hit me, a low, buzzing hum of money changing hands. I wasn't wearing my canvas smock. I wasn't wearing the travel clothes I'd slept in on the flight from Rome. I was wearing a black dress, sharp and tailored, the kind of thing you wear to bury a king, or dethrone one. The room was packed. Hedge fund managers, museum trustees, private collectors who kept their treasures in free ports in Geneva. They were all there to pick the bones of Arthur Carter's legacy. In the center of the room, on a raised dais, stood the Madonna of the Lilies. It was lit perfectly, glowing with a soft, ethereal light. It looked magnificent. It was also a lie. Daniel was holding court near the podium, a glass of champagne in one hand, his other hand resting on Levi's shoulder. He looked expansive, flushed with the kind of adrenaline that only comes from a 9-figure payday. He was laughing at something a collector said, throwing his head back. Then he saw me. His smile didn't drop, it just curdled. He excused himself and walked over, Levi trailing behind him like a shadow. Daniel spoke loud enough to draw eyes. He asked if I had crawled back because I ran out of pasta money, or if I had realized a rusty key didn't pay rent. Levi snickered, suggesting I tried to sell it for scrap and got rejected. I didn't look at Levi. I looked at Daniel. I looked at the man who had raised me to believe I was small, who had taken the one person who believed in me, Grandpa Arthur, and turned his memory into a marketing gimmick. I told him I wasn't there for money. My voice was quiet, but in the sudden lull of conversation near us, it carried. He stepped closer, invading my space. The smell of his expensive cologne was suffocating. He told me to get out, calling it a private event for serious buyers. He warned me not to force him to have me dragged out, saying it would be embarrassing for me. I agreed it would be embarrassing. But not for me. I stepped around him. He reached out to grab my arm, but I was already moving toward the podium. The auctioneer, a British man with a gavel made of ivory, looked confused. I ignored him. I walked up the steps. Levi hissed, asking his father to get me off the stage. Daniel snapped his fingers at the security guards by the entrance, ordering them to get me out immediately. 2 guards started toward me. The room fell silent. The buyers sensed the tension, the crack in the polished veneer. This was the drama they pretended to hate but secretly loved. But the guards didn't reach me. The main doors of the gallery swung open again. They didn't just open, they were thrown wide. 4 men walked in. 2 were wearing the windbreakers of U.S. federal marshals. The other 2 were in dark Italian suits, carrying leather briefcases embossed with a seal that most people in the room wouldn't recognize, but Daniel certainly would. The crossed keys of the Holy See. Cardinal Vittorio's legal counsel had arrived. The security guards stopped dead in their tracks. The marshals stepped forward, their presence filling the room with a cold, heavy authority that made the billionaires clutch their drinks a little tighter. One of the marshals spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the gallery like a knife. He announced that the facility was now under the jurisdiction of the United States Department of Justice, acting in cooperation with the Italian Carabinieri Art Squad. Daniel dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the polished concrete floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the silence. He looked at the marshals, then he looked at me standing on the podium looking down at him. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking up at my father. I was the one holding the gavel. The room was dead silent. I could hear the hum of the gallery's climate control system and the frantic beating of my own heart. I adjusted the microphone. I didn't need to shout. The truth, when it's this ugly, has its own volume. I announced that the items were not for sale. They were stolen property. I tapped a key on my laptop, connected to the gallery's main display system. The massive screens behind me, which had been showing glamour shots of the Madonna, flickered and changed. Up came the ledger. The yellowed pages, the careful handwriting of my grandfather, and the damning modern ink of my father. I read from the screen. Lot 89. The Madonna of the Lilies. Listed in the Vatican secret archives as restoration loan only. Current status. Missing. Last known location, the Carter Vault. I clicked again. An invoice appeared. Invoice dated 2019. To Studio Rossi. For aging treatment on replica panel. Signed, Daniel Carter. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I looked at the buyers in the front row. I told them the painting on stage was a fake. A very expensive, very beautiful fake. My father commissioned it 3 years ago. The real Madonna has been in a climate-controlled storage facility in Zurich since 1998, placed there by my grandfather to protect it from exactly this kind of greed. Daniel lunged forward. He screamed that I was lying, that I was insane, and that I was trying to ruin him because he cut me out of the will. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply walked over to the painting. I pulled a small UV flashlight from my pocket, a restorer's tool. I aimed the light at the Madonna's blue robe and explained that if the painting were from the 16th century, the ultramarine pigment would absorb the UV light and appear dark. But modern synthetic ultramarine used in forgeries. I clicked the light on. The robe glowed a bright fluorescent purple. Fluoresces, I finished. Because of the chemical binders used in acrylics. This paint is less than 5 years old. The room erupted. The billionaires in the front row stood up and started shouting at their brokers. The auctioneer stepped down from his podium, looking like he wanted to vanish. Daniel stared at the glowing purple robe. The color of his ruin. He turned to me, his eyes wide and wild. He hissed, stepping onto the dais, calling me ungrateful. He claimed he built this for me, for the family. He shouted that Arthur didn't care about us, that he cared about dead painters and hid millions of dollars in a hole in the ground while we scraped by. I told him quietly that we didn't scrape by. We lived in a penthouse. We had everything. It just wasn't enough for him. He roared that it was never enough, and the silence in the room was absolute. He didn't realize he was confessing. The narcissist in him couldn't help it. He had to be the victim. He screamed that he deserved that money, that he was the son, and that Arthur treated him like an employee and locked away his inheritance to protect trash. I told him he locked it away because he knew Daniel would do exactly this. He knew Daniel couldn't tell the difference between price and value. The federal marshals moved in. One of them took Daniel by the arm. "Daniel Carter, you are under arrest for wire fraud, grand larceny, and the trafficking of stolen cultural property." Daniel tried to pull away. He shouted that he was the CEO of Carter Auctions and they couldn't touch him because it was his gallery. The Italian agent stepped forward. "Not anymore." He held up a document with a wax seal. "As of this morning, under the terms of the Treaty of Stewardship signed by Arthur Carter in 1974, ownership of all assets held by the Restoration Trust reverts to the primary custodian in the event of a breach of contract." He looked at me. "The custodian is Miss Scarlett Carter." Daniel looked at me. The realization hit him slowly, agonizingly. He hadn't just lost the money. He hadn't just lost the business. He had been evicted from his own life by the daughter he called useless. His voice cracked, the arrogance finally breaking. He pleaded with me to tell them it was a misunderstanding. He said we could fix it. He reminded me he was my father. I looked at him. I saw the man who had mocked my work, who had sold my grandfather's memory, who had tried to erase me. I told him he was right. He was my father. And that was the only reason I wasn't pressing charges for the attempted sale of my workshop. I turned to the marshals and told them to take him. They led him away in handcuffs, past the stunned crowd, past the fake Madonna, and out the glass doors he had walked through like a king only an hour ago. Levi had already disappeared out the back exit, cowardly to the end. The room was empty of noise, empty of the buzz of money. It was just me, the Cardinal's men, and the art. The Italian agent approached me respectfully. He said the Vatican extended its gratitude and the Cardinal sent his regards. I asked what would happen to the collection. He said the forgeries would be destroyed. The originals. That was up to me. I was the director of the trust now. I looked at the empty gallery. It didn't look like a place of business anymore. It looked like a blank canvas. I told him we were going to return them. Not all at once. But we were going to start a restitution program. We were going to fix the history he tried to break. The fallout wasn't immediate. It was a slow, grinding process of dismantling a life built on lies. The Carter auction house didn't just close. It was dissected. Forensic accountants swarmed the offices, cataloging every fake invoice, every forged provenance paper, every dollar Daniel had siphoned from the trust. Daniel was denied bail. The judge, looking at the evidence of international flight risk and the sheer scale of the fraud, wasn't interested in his excuses about protecting the family legacy. I saw him once at the arraignment. He looked smaller, stripped of his expensive suits and his arrogance. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, muttering to his public defender about how unfair it all was. Levi tried to call me a week later. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to it once. He said things were complicated. The feds froze his accounts. He needed a place to crash just for a few weeks since the penthouse was sealed. I deleted it. I wasn't his sister anymore. I wasn't his safety net. I was the person he had laughed at for years, and now I was the only one standing. I met Cardinal Vittorio one last time before he returned to Rome. We sat in a small private garden behind St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. The noise of the city felt miles away. He sipped an espresso and told me the assets had been recovered. The Swiss accounts my grandfather set up. Daniel never found them. He only found the operating budget. The endowment was intact. He placed a heavy envelope on the table. It wasn't a rusty key this time. It was a contract. He said the Restoration Trust required a director. Someone to oversee the restitution of the stolen works, to manage the collection, and to ensure the history is preserved. It is not a job for a merchant. It is a job for a custodian. I looked at the contract. The salary was significant, enough to never worry about rent again, but that wasn't what made my hands shake. It was the title. Director of Heritage and Restoration. I said I was just a restorer, a reflex of my old life. The cardinal stood up. No, he said. You are the guardian. Arthur knew it. I know it. Now you must know it. I signed the papers. I walked back to the workshop in Soho. The for sale sign my father had placed in the window was gone, ripped down by the marshals. I unlocked the door. The smell hit me instantly. Turpentine, linseed oil, old wood. It didn't smell like failure anymore. It smelled like home. I walked to my workbench. My tools were exactly where I'd left them. The solvents, the brushes, the magnifying lamps. I sat down on the stool Grandpa Arthur had used for 40 years. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the iron key. It was still rough, pitted with corrosion. I did what I do best. I took a cotton swab, dipped it in a mild chelating solution and began to work. Slowly, carefully I stripped away the rust. I dissolved the layers of neglect. Underneath, the iron was dark and strong. The crossed keys of the Vatican seal emerged, sharp and clear. It wasn't a piece of junk. It was a master key. I framed it. I hung it on the wall right next to Grandpa Arthur's photo. Not as a trophy but as a reminder. I looked at the empty workshop, soon to be filled with a new team of restorers I would hire. I thought about the people like me. The quiet ones. To everyone out there who has been told they are too sensitive, or too quiet. To everyone who has been mocked for choosing a path that doesn't pay in prestige or fame. To everyone who has been told their skills are useless, because they don't fit into a quarterly earnings report. You are not weak. You are observant. You are not useless. You are simply waiting for the lock that matches your key. My father thought power was noise. He thought it was shouting over people, buying things, owning things. He didn't understand that real power is stewardship. It's protecting the things that matter when no one else is looking. It's knowing the difference between a forgery and a masterpiece. Your integrity is your inheritance. Don't let anyone sell it for cheap. I turned off the lights in the front room, leaving the workshop illuminated by the street lamps outside. I had work to do tomorrow. Real work.